All right, so today we're gonna do this live lecture. We're gonna talk to folks about potentially how to make money with franchising. And I've tweeted about this some, but like my journey with franchising, Connor and audience, was one where I used to think it was kind of a dirty word, like the F word, and I didn't really like it. I thought it was dumb. I thought people should start their own businesses. I thought they shouldn't give up control and all this stuff. And I think as I see more and more things happen, and have been more and more exposed to that world, the more enthusiastic I am about franchise as an option that is franchising that is a right option for some people at the right time. And I think the biggest moment, Connor, was I met a guy who is running. He was in my son's Cub Scout troop. That one of the dads showed up and he rolled in like he and his wife rolled in like two brand new Range Rovers, and I was like, "What do these guys do?" They owned McDonald's, six of them here in San Antonio, and I was like, "Oh, like there's something to be said for this franchising thing." So, well,
Yeah,
cool. Well,
that's
well,
awesome.
well, thanks for being here, Connor. You want to give like 30 seconds of who you are, and then we'll like dig into it and go from there.
Yeah, let's do it. So I'm Connor Groce. I live in based here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been in franchising about 6 years. Got into it. I was initially working for a multi-unit franchise ownership group and a boutique fitness brand. Those franchisees wanted to diversify into home services, and I kind of became their operating partner in that brand and invested a little bit of money alongside of them. But predominantly, I was bringing the sweat, and they were bringing the know-how and most of the capital to the table. And so we bought a home service franchise called Shine in 2019. I ran that brand as an owner operator for about the first 18 months and still, and then hired a manager, and it's been pretty hands off since then. And I still do own it today, but knew I wanted to get into something that was perhaps a little bit more scalable and something, yeah, just that was more aligned with my long term goals. And so got into a second brand called Smash My Trash in 2022. Done a few acquisitions in that brand. So this is a B2B service. It's mobile trash compaction. So we don't own dumpsters, but we compact trash to save people money. And so anyway, so I've learned a lot through that brand of, just scaling and reorganizing personnel. And, that's been a great one for acquisitions and stuff like that. And so it was just earlier this year that I also became a franchise consultant, given that I've seen kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of franchising, and I've been through this process a couple times now. Just started to get a lot of people reaching out to me asking questions about, how do you know the difference between, good franchises and bad franchises? How do I think about this? In alignment with my long-term goals, whether that's to build a massive portfolio and sell it, or whether it's to build a diversified portfolio and hang on to it, or whether it's to own something and operate it for the long term. And so I do that as well, in addition to operating my businesses. Yeah, thank you for the disclaimer. None of this is legal advice or anything. Please do your own research. But that's the quick and skinny on me.
That's awesome. Well, yeah. So if I ask questions or we ask questions, there's some stuff you can't talk about because you're legally a franchise burger. So I put this up. Good news, I can say whatever the hell I want. So it'll be perfect.
Absolutely.
Uh, awesome. Okay. So who you and I talked about this when we kind of prepared for today. Like, who are we talking to today, kind of as our audience? Who we want to talk to that one, and then I'll take us from there.
Yeah, absolutely. My guess is from the folks that registered, it's like we have a pretty diverse array of people here today. It sounds like we have some folks who are already in the franchise game and are coming just for the conversation, which I think is great. But by and large, I think we have a lot of people that are whether they currently own a business and they're just interested in hearing more about franchising, for future opportunities to expand or to diversify. Or if we have people who want to own businesses and are evaluating, maybe they're weighing franchises versus, the ETA, traditional ETA route, or starting their own thing. Just people who want to own a business and are thinking about franchising as that next path. I also want to say, if we have people here today that like Michael used to think, thought about franchising as the F word. If we have any of those folks here today, I'm glad that you're here, and you'll leave, and your beliefs will be reinforced, or maybe you'll leave more open-minded. So regardless of how you think about franchising, I'm glad that we have everybody here today.
Thank you for insinuating I'm open minded. All right, that sounds awesome. So in
Sure.
the end, hopefully, like most people listen to my stuff because they want to figure out how to make more money and save money, mostly make more money. So hopefully we'll give you open up your eyes to franchising as a path to do that. So Cool. All right. So yeah, so what you'll get out of today, precisely that. And then I forgot to mention today we do these live because it's supposed to have a lot of Q&A and speak to your questions. So the presentation here will be pretty short. And then if you have things that you want us to talk about, like go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll answer them live, and go from there. So Ty, who's here, who works with me, he'll be moderating all that. And if you put any bad words in there, he'll be sure to tell us those. So that'll be good. But hopefully you leave today with a basic perspective on franchising, some guidance of how to explore it, some tips and tricks, and then you can figure out if it's right for you as a way to make money or not. So cool. All right. So Connor, I mean, would you want to answer this question? Like, what is franchise entrepreneurship versus kind of classical like entrepreneurship as we think about it?
Absolutely. So, when I think about franchise entrepreneurship, it can range. It can range based on what your vision is as a business owner and what you're trying to build. But ultimately, franchise entrepreneurship as a term encompasses anybody that owns businesses that are a franchise. And so, in terms of getting into it, what it can look like is it's again, whether you're somebody who's transitioning out of a W 2, or whether you're somebody who is, you currently own businesses and you want to add other avenues through which you can, utilize your current infrastructure of personnel, of, facilities, whatever. Um, Whether you're somebody who wants to do a roll up. I think that there's a lot of potential harmony between entrepreneurship through acquisition, acquisition entrepreneurship, and franchise entrepreneurship as well. But ultimately, franchise entrepreneurship is anybody who wants to pursue their goals of business ownership through the franchise avenue.
Super cool. All right, and this is where we'll talk next about how does franchising work? Like, how is it different than like a regular business?
Sure. So franchising, at the bare bones of it, works where you have a franchisor, which is a franchise company, and they are the ones that have a business model, ideally, which I know we'll talk more about, but ideally it's a business model that's seeing some success. They've been able to figure a lot of stuff out and become and employ experts in their field. And they basically have distilled a business model down to the point that they can package it up and give it to somebody else and say, go execute. That's one layer of it. Typically, part of this model as well is that there's going to be some synergy from a marketing standpoint, whether that's brand recognition, whether that is vendor relationships that franchisors have. Whether that sometimes they do that internally or do a piece of the marketing internally. But at its core, franchising is a model where you have a big company that instead of going and owning all of the local units, they instead partner, through a franchise agreement with local operators that are going to operate the local presences of this typically national company.
Yeah.
Is
And
that
some people are saying I'm very quiet. So let me see if I can figure out what I did wrong here. Okay, is that better? Can you guys hear me better?
it's interesting? I can hear you just
Oh.
fine.
Anyway, if you're in the chat, like tell me. I just turned up the gain and I'm talking louder. So,
Yeah, it was good
okay.
on my end as well, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Yeah, right on. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. And if you have any more chatty type stuff, go ahead and put it in the chat. So super helpful. I will stand closer to the microphone. Go like this. Okay, so so I put up a picture here of something I know very well, which is this. Like most people don't know that a lot of chilies are actually franchised, right? So like if you could double click like on what you just talked about, like what is who are the actors in somebody who's an entrepreneur like me? Like say I wanted to open up a Chili's, like who are the players going to be in that scenario, right? There's obviously the franchisor of Chili's, right? Brinker International, best stock in the world. You should totally buy it. And then there's other folks like the regulators. And then so who are the players kind of that would help me figure out if I could open my own Chili's this way as a franchisee?
So Chili's, like corporate, as you mentioned, they're the franchisor, right? Which is the first player. You as the local operator are the franchisee. When you start to talk about regulators, so franchises are regulated at the national level. It's under the FTC. So every franchisor that has an interest in growing through franchising, they have to register with the FTC and file what's called a franchise disclosure document or an FDD. You'll hear that referred to a lot. There are also 13 states where they're called registration states, where franchisors also have to register at the state level in order to franchise in those states. One of which is the state of Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, they're all public record. All of the FDDs are public record. So if you want to, you can go and look up online what those documents look like. But effectively, it's a very, very long and legally boring document. But included in there is the item 7, which that's where it outlines, in the Chili's example, it would outline what the initial investment looks like to open a Chili's. And there are varying degrees of disclosure that different franchisors will outline, but a lot of times they will break it down and show you, between what you're paying in a franchise fee versus what, the build out typically is going to cost, and working capital, and all of those things will be built out in the item 7. And then the other part that people are typically interested in is the item 19, which is when they typically will disclose the financial performance of units. And a quick note on that, franchisors can share pretty much as much or as little as they want to in the item 19. So some of them will only share revenue, some of them will share full P&Ls. Some of them will only share, locations that have been available or been open for, a certain period of time. So they have a lot of latitude for how much they disclose, but franchisors are limited to only utilizing what they disclose in their item 19 during the process that you go through. So, they can't not disclose anything in the FDD and then make a bunch of earnings claims that they haven't, published. And that is in place to protect the franchisees against franchisors making claims that they're not prepared to back up.
Yeah. Well, I just pulled this up here on the screen. So one of the things, whenever I was curious about franchises like Orange Theory or even Smash My Trash, I would go look up the FDDs. Here, I think I pulled it up, the one for Wisconsin here. And then there's some other states that are full disclosure states too, right? I think California is one.
Nevada.
Yeah.
California isn't public record, but they're also a registration state.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah. Well, so one question I had about the FDDs, like a lot of the times they'll say like, oh, the registration, the franchise fee is X, but then you learn in practice it gets discounted heavily to operators of franchises. So how should I think about like trusting the numbers and stuff like that is in the FDDs?
Yeah. So I always say the FDD is the starting line. It is not the finish line in everything. So everything that you read in there, that's going to give you a snapshot, but it is very important to, talk with people on the ground, in a lot of respects, and just understand like, how is this actually looking in practice? Now, when it comes to like a franchise fee, typically those are not, they're not going to vary very much, with the main exception being, a lot of times franchisors, if you open up multiple units or if you commit to opening up multiple units, they're not going to charge you like a full franchise fee for each territory. A lot of times that's going to be discounted with each subsequent unit. But typically that will be disclosed as well. And, just a quick note, jumping ahead a little bit, sometimes when people are buying franchises, they'll hire a lawyer and pay them a crazy amount of money to go and like redline, a franchise agreement. And, the challenge with that is a lot of times those are not super negotiable, so you just want to be careful about making sure. It's one thing to have somebody review something, but you just want to be careful about utilizing resources with documents like this if there's not a constructive outcome, that's going to, work in your favor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So-
Okay, so one thing I wanted to make sure we talk about, like, so to get into entrepreneurship, it used to feel like there were two paths. You could start up a new business or you could go buy one. And then franchising is kind of this middle ground, right? Where you buy like a business opportunity. And I know that's my language, not yours. So like as you think about when should people do each one of these things? Like startup would be like you start a digital marketing agency or a contracting firm or any of that kind of stuff from scratch, right? A retail shop. Acquisition would be you go buy one of those things from somebody else or go buy a business that's already established, even if it's a franchise. And then like franchising is like, okay, this middle ground where I go like start up a business, but it's already established and defined and there's like a structure there. Like when should I choose which, and kind of how do you encourage people to think about, the universe of kind of getting into entrepreneurship options that they have here?
Yeah, for sure. And I would also say that like, any of these obviously can be great options. In fact, I've done all three of these in my, business ownership journey. So when I think about, the first two, like let's talk about starting a business versus starting a franchise. I think that one comes down to the question of like on day one, do you want to be innovating or do you want to be executing? And that's not a leading question. There's not a right or wrong answer. Some people, if it's in a field that you know really well and that you're already an expert at and that you're passionate about, a lot of times that like a franchise doesn't make sense for somebody. I remember I was looking at one time at a pool franchise. I love pools. I grew up a swimmer. I was a swim coach, and I don't like manual labor except for cleaning pools for some reason. And so, uh, that wouldn't be a good franchise for me because I would be so excited about cleaning pools and about, iterating that I don't, it doesn't make sense for me to kind of subcontract the expertise to somebody else when I'm already an expert in that. That's my opinion on it. I'm not passionate about window cleaning, which was my first business, and I'm not passionate about the trash industry. So it made a lot of sense for me in that context to say, hey, why don't I bolt my wagon onto something that already works? Um, when we talk about acquisitions, and I'm a big fan of ETA, and I think that ETA and franchising can harmonize beautifully when they're executed the right way, and they can clash tremendously when they're not executed the right way. But quickly, we talk about the overlap between acquisitions and franchises. One thing just to keep in mind, I think if you're somebody who's looking to acquire an existing business, is that a lot of franchise acquisitions are going to trade internally within the system. Other franchisees want to buy those. And so as an outsider trying to get in, you're up against this disadvantage where you're kind of picking over the leftovers of everybody else that's already in the system. And so that's why, even as I'm acquisition oriented, I'm still inclined to get into the system first and then utilize acquisitions as a growth strategy once the wind is at my back instead of at my front. So all of these can be great models, but that's how I think about them.
Yeah, there's a. By the way, I switched my AirPods, so hopefully this is better. So I
Whoa,
apologize.
I
Yeah.
can hear you way loud and clear now. Whoa.
uh, Quality's not as good, but it'll be there. So sorry for people that I was really quiet. Hopefully I didn't chase people off.
Yeah.
All right, so this kind of okay, so this is we're going to talk about how to choose a franchise, but I think before we do that, we're going to talk about the types of franchises. We do have a question asking about what are the best tools and resources to validate a market in franchising. But let's talk about the types of franchises first. You put together this kind of 2x2 that you had shared with me. Do you want to walk through this real fast?
Yes, this is kind of how I break down just the franchises out there that I personally work with and am interested in investing in. This doesn't include QSR or food. That's kind of a different ball game. That's so far out of my ballpark that I don't really pay attention to it. So, but anyway, so this is a matrix that has B2C and B2B at the top, business to consumer or business to business, and then on the side we have non-brick and mortar and brick and mortar. That's just does this business have a retail location where customers are coming to you, basically? So we have these four quadrants. There really aren't not many opportunities at all for B2B brick and mortar. So there's not a lot there. But these other three quadrants, this is what I work with people to distill down to one or two of these quadrants that we focus their search on. So, we look at the quadrant in the top left. That's the one where you typically are seeing the most activity, at least right now. So that's things like home services, pets. Obviously, this is going to be the mobile component of pets. So mobile grooming and things like that. Home care, whether that's, medical or non-medical care. Off to the top right, you're seeing commercial services. That's, very similar to home services, but just concepts that are more B2B oriented. A lot of times you'll see crossover. So you'll see, brands that have both a B2C component and the B2B component. Restoration, I think of as a B2B concept as well, since that's how they're driving a lot of their revenue, even if they're working with homeowners. And so anyway, now you go to the bottom left, you've got wellness, fitness, youth, and pets. When I all in here, it's like we're talking about, mobile services, wellness, pets, and kids. I think that those are the best, lanes right now, because those are all areas where people with money are spending outsized amounts of money to take care of their homes, take care of their pets, take care of their kids, and take care of their bodies. And that's kind of where I focus.
Yeah. Well, and I think this ties into one of the questions from Leach Fam. Or no, this was an anonymous attendee. We'll come back to Leach's thing to validate a market, which I think is the next topic. But
like there's a percentage of people that want to get into owning a franchise but don't want to run the business or buy themselves a job. Like how does this quadrant kind of fit into that? Like where do those types of opportunities tend to end up if somebody wants to invest in or own a franchise but doesn't want to work in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're going to find a wide range of views on this topic, but I'm going to share you mine for what it's worth. I used to say that was a bad idea across the board because I've run these things and, service businesses are hard and there's no, a franchise is not, you don't get a pass on operational execution, right? And I have, I've been around people, I've known people personally that have just gotten into these things and tried to keep their jobs, and it just becomes abundantly clear very quickly that they bit off way more than they could chew, particularly as a first-time business owner. So the reason I've evolved on that a little bit is because two things. First of all, I've been able to talk with people who have had success keeping their jobs and owning a franchise. The second thing is that I failed to take into account initially the nuance in that there are some businesses, some business models that are going to be more conducive to less owner involvement on the front end than others. And just some people's jobs are going to be more conducive to that than others. So to address that point, when you're looking at concepts that you're trying to optimize more for owner involvement, there are a couple of lenses that you can look at that from. When you look at brick and mortar businesses, there's a lot of simplicity of the operation that comes from the operation being contained within four walls as opposed to being mobile. Just when operations are contained within four walls and all employees are within arm's length of a manager at all times, I do think that businesses like that tend to streamline more towards the owner being able to have one direct report and that direct report being a manager. But beyond that, when you look at non-brick and mortar businesses, I would also look at a couple things. First of all, like how quickly, or when you look at the org chart of a business like that, is there one point of contact that the owner can be, responsible for? I think that that's the first step really in optimizing owner involvement. And the second thing that I look towards is where are they getting their leads? If it's a B2B concept where, you're having to go and pound the pavement, which I'm in one of these businesses and they can be great. I love B2B businesses, but not if I'm trying to be super hands off as an owner, because those are going to be more relationship driven. Whereas if you're in something that's more B2C oriented, and it's going to be, there's a lot of focus on digital marketing and things like that. It's a lot easier as an owner that's trying to be more hands off to be able to turn some dials and optimize their marketing spend. That's simpler than a B2B concept where you as the owner are going to have to be a lot of times the one that's more involved in driving revenue. So I'm kind of rambling. Does that help? I think address the question.
Yeah, totally dig it. Cool. All right, let's keep moving because we want to make sure we save lots of time for Q&A. So these are the types of franchises out there. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about like who you are and what people want to work on and kind of parameters there. But like this question from Leach is like, how do I think about validating the market? Like when I look at franchises, like how do I know which one's going to be a winner? And there's like tons of and this is me talking, not Connor talking. There's tons of horror stories of failed franchises, junk franchises, even some very successful franchises being horrible deals for the franchisee, right? Like Subway, Curves are like some examples of people just getting picked over and beat up. And then there's some great examples. There's the McDonald's, Orange Theory Fitness, things that have just like totally cranked, where people are just doing really well. So like, how do I go about, if I'm an entrepreneur, like how do I go about picking the right franchise that's going to be a winner and not a loser for me? Maybe this is where your baseball thing comes in.
Yeah. So first thing, so to keep in mind is that critics of franchising will often say that most franchises suck and are garbage. And I love franchising. This is where I plan to stay for my career indefinitely. But those critics are right in that respect. Like if you look at the 4,000 franchises in America, most of them are garbage that nobody should touch with a 10-foot pole, in my opinion. However, I also think that when you look at the 35 million small businesses in America, Most of them are not very great either, statistically speaking. But the rational, conclusion from that, in my opinion, isn't to say, most small businesses suck, so nobody should own one, but it's to utilize that backdrop, as motivation to be very prudent in choosing the right one. And so when we talk about like, how do you pick a franchise, I'm going to include Shayna's question in the chat that I saw, which is how many franchises do you recommend a franchisee to look at before selecting one? Typically 3, I think, is a really good number to do a deep dive on, because that's the best way to balance being both focused and thorough. It's not a good idea to look at one because that's not thorough enough. You don't have anything to weigh it against, but it's also not a good idea to look at 10 or 20 because you're going too wide, and it's hard to make any traction and make a well-informed decision when you're looking at that many opportunities. So I think 3 really is the sweet spot. Then the baseball analogy, this is how I, as a franchisee, evaluate franchises. And it's very intentionally a baseball field and not just like these are the 3 pillars or the 3 variables to consider, because it's important to look at one and not the other, or one before the other, in my opinion. Particularly as ambitious, people, we tend to overly index the high level strategic things. And, sometimes if you're not careful, that can cloud your judgment towards the fundamentals like unit economics. Base number 1. What does this franchise cost relative to the performance that you're seeing from other franchisees? That is number 1. And before we start to talk about something that's growing really quickly or a leadership team that you really like, it's very, very simple. How much money are you putting in this box, and how much money can you project based on the feedback that you're getting to get out of it? Okay. The second thing is looking at the growth trajectory of the brand. Now, a franchise is growing very quickly. That does not independently validate the merit of the opportunity. I always say, like, McDonald's selling the most hamburgers, that doesn't independently mean that they're the best hamburger in the world, right? They're strategically positioned to sell the most hamburgers. But what that does do is it does provide a baseline layer of validation that makes me feel better, that other people see enough promise here that they're putting their own capital at risk. And brands that have a lot of growth and a lot of energy behind them, there's something about it from a strategic standpoint that, to me as an entrepreneur, it's really favorable. Like, I like to enter a system with a lot of other people. I like to see what that can amount to in terms of acquisition opportunities down the road, and the franchisor having the financial bandwidth to invest in the right personnel, and the brand equity that can come from having a nationwide presence and all of those things. And then the third thing is looking at the leadership and talking with leadership. This one's far more qualitative than it is quantitative, but these are really the 3 bases that I personally run through as a franchisee before I hit home plate and sign a franchise agreement.
Yeah. So, question for me, and then we should do this next question from the audience. So, one of the things I've noticed is there are times in which it makes a lot of sense to get into a franchise system, and there are times when I'm kind of worried, right? So I think Orange Theory is a great example. I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, but like a group that had rolled up a bunch of Orange Theory franchises like went bankrupt. And like a lot of people had rolled over for some cash and a lot of equity. And basically all these franchisees that had sold out, their equities worth nothing now, are subject to not getting anything out of that. So, like as I look at Orange Theory, right, there was a period where Orange Theory was like the hottest thing since sliced bread. They all had huge waiting lines and stuff like this. It was hard to get franchise, the actual franchisee licenses. I have a buddy who was fighting to get more of them, and it was on this like huge upswing. And now like the worm has turned, and that franchise has been to some extent kind of overbuilt, overgrown, over expectationed. Like, how should I think about like when I get into a franchise, and like, is there a way to figure out which one is going to be like the next McDonald's that's evergreen, and which one is going to be kind of seeing a downturn in the future?
Yeah, when I get that crystal ball, I will. I'll be very happy. But so no, there's no way to know definitively. There are things. So really quickly, so on the Orange Theory front, and before I comment on that, I want to share. I do know that the former CEO of that group. So before I comment on it, I just want to share that in transparency. But I think in situations like that, it's important for those of us that are small business owners to keep into account. Like, this is a big private equity firm that executed this strategy and it didn't work. So reading the tea leaves here, it looks like they were paying double-digit multiples for these businesses and got in way too much debt. And the new developments didn't underwrite like they planned. and it didn't work out, right? I also know people that are in that system that continue to operate, and they're like they're performing marginally worse than they were like, 3 years ago at their peak. So they're still doing all right. So it's
Yeah.
important to think about just, that, yeah, there's a difference in, you hear these headlines, and it's important to just, in my opinion, take that with a grain of salt, because we are coming from this at a different, point of scale. But I think, Michael, like
Yeah.
the point of your question, and, you know, of how do you know kind of what life cycle a brand is in. I kind of think about it a little bit differently, which is that I look for stuff that doesn't have a life cycle. In that, industries that are super durable, which there are a lot of those in franchising. I'm not smart enough to time the market. That's why I don't, speculate on, stocks or crypto or anything else. And I bring the same approach to franchising. So I just don't, that's not how I think about it, if that's fair.
Yeah. Focus on stuff that's not a fad. Well, I mean, there's all the Froyo kind of franchises, right? When that was a big deal. Man, good times. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love the idea of focus on stuff that's not going anywhere for sure. You just don't have to worry about it. People are always going
Well,
to need plumbing and stuff like that.
and so I think that the main hedge against that is either, you're looking at franchising in industries that are very durable, but that franchise is bringing a tweak on that industry and some kind of a competitive advantage, but you know that the industry has a strong track record. But look, I mean, I bought a franchise, Smash My Trash, that was this was a very nascent concept. They started franchising in 2019, and they're really like the first people to do this on a nationwide scale, and it was disruptive. And so, I guess that was speculative in a way, but what gave me comfort is that, like, trash isn't going away, and
Right.
there's some durability there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Somebody asked if we would double click on the idea of unit economics being good or bad. So what is that? Could you double click on that of the three kind of legs of the stool here, the unit economics one?
Absolutely. So, unit economics. So, like we talked about the FDD. So, you are going to see in the item 7, which again is the initial investment that's disclosed, and the item 19, which is the financial performance that's disclosed. You can look in the FDD and see that. Now, I always say, again, I think I mentioned this, like the FDD is the starting line; it is not the finish line. So that's going to give you your initial snapshot. But it is extremely important to take that and go and talk with franchisees. This is another reason why only looking at 3 is, in my opinion, the best way to go about it, because you're not going to be able to have quality conversations with franchisees of 20 different brands, right? But if you go and you talk to franchisees and ask them about, their experience ramping that franchise, what kind of financial performance are they seeing? Was the initial investment range disclosed consistent with what it cost them to get off the ground and running and cash flow positive? All of that is very, very important, because sometimes you'll see if a franchise started in one part of the country, if it's very regional, all of that data, the inputs and the financial performance that they disclose, that's going to be skewed one direction or another that may or may not, translate perfectly to the market in which you're doing business. But if you talk with the franchisee that is in the town over, that's going to give you much more applicable feedback to be able to start to understand unit economics.
Take it. That was a great question.
Great
Okay, one
question.
more question. Okay, before we go into financing, which we should talk about. Um, so somebody asked, and we kind of got rid of the question. So let me ask you this: like, what are the tools to do like franchise discovery? So obviously, I can go to a broker, which is what you do. Are there other ways to kind of explore and learn about franchising? Are there hacks that people do and stuff like that?
This is going to sound like a self-serving answer because I am a consultant or a broker. So there are. The easiest way is to go find a franchise consultant that you trust, and we can talk about what that would look like. But there are some tools out there. My challenge with a lot of them, pretty much any ranking that you're going to find is skewed. It's marketing. Like, franchisors are paying for their ranking, just like all of us pay, to be ranked on Google. So it is very, very challenging to bifurcate tools that are constructive and informative and helpful between what is, again, what is marketed to get you to a certain outcome, instead of giving you information so that you can decide for yourself. So with that being said, like it's really hard for me to reference like, hey, here are tools that you could use, because there's just a lot of noise that's out there. And so really you're going to get the best information talking to people that have done this before.
100%. Okay, cool. So we have another question about how people could like build wealth over time through franchising, which you've done personally, which I think is a cool story. But before we do that, this is a question from Nick. So let's come back to the question from Nick, because I think fundamentally, I think you and I want to talk a little bit about how people finance these things, and so we built a slide around that, right? So it's the SBA. I think a lot of people don't know how big the SBA is a player in making franchises work. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I pulled up the slide here.
Sure. Yeah. So SBA, a lot of people utilize SBA loans to get into franchises. And I think that the common misconception is that you can only use those for existing locations. You can use SBA loans to develop new franchises. Lenders typically like franchises or view them favorably overall, because there is, some inherent, that just from being more conservative on their end, they like seeing the structure. And if you work with SBA lenders that have relationships with specific franchise brands, they have, they've already underwritten the business model, right? So they already
Yeah.
see enough potential in it. If you're looking at franchise XYZ, they may have already done 20 deals with this franchise. And so they know that end of it. All they have to do is underwrite you as the individual, and you're good to go. Typically, you're going to see those deals getting done for 15 to 20% equity. So, if you're starting a service-based franchise, it's going to cost, if it costs 300K, 20% of that is you're looking at 60K in equity that would be required. The other option a lot of people use is the ROBS program, the Rollover Business Startup, and that's where you can roll your 401K or IRA. I won't get into the granularity there, because you have to make sure that it's done the right way. But if anybody out there is looking at franchising or needs help getting in touch with lenders, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help get you in touch with somebody that's franchise specific, because it is a different game than, for an acquisition. For an acquisition, most of the time, I would just go find, the best SBA lender you can find, and just make sure that they're open to working with franchises. But for new ones, I think it's important to pick somebody who is franchise industry focused.
Yeah, right on. Okay, well, cool. So, and I think this is where I'll read Nick's question, because it kind of plays into this, right? So the SBA loan is a way to get your foot in the door with low personal net worth, which is Nick's question. And then kind of how do people go from there, right? Like, and maybe you could share some of what you've learned in doing that. But let me read Nick's question. I'm curious if you could describe the path to wealth for a franchisee, meaning, is it possible to start as an owner operator with little personal net worth and then grow one's wealth through franchising? What does that path look like? So like obviously the gateway drug there, which I mean in the nicest way possible, yay me, I have no regulations. I can do whatever I want. Like is, SBA has super high leverage for people. You're getting 90% plus in some situations to start a franchise. Then kind of how have you seen other of your clients kind of go from there, Connor? Like if let's say you get one franchise and that starts cash flowing for you, like how do people typically go about it? Do they open more locations of the same franchise? Do they look at other franchise systems? And I know there are some huge businesses that have been built that have 200 plus different versions of Taco Bell and KFC and all the other kind of franchise QSR type concepts. Like, what is the typical path that somebody goes from first franchise to kind of reaching that level of escape velocity wealth?
Love it. Great question. So, by the way, my net worth was $20,000 when I got started in 2019. I'm not going to share what it is today, but it's more than that. So, but that was because like that's an example where like I had I didn't have enough money to get started on my own, so I went and partnered with and also didn't know what I was doing, so I went and partnered with people that brought the capital and brought the knowledge to the table, and that was how I was able to get my start. With regard to like the path to wealth. So I talk about the triple option a lot, which is another sports analogy here. Sorry, I'm X and Oing people to death here, but the three outcomes, in franchising, three great outcomes it's the three E's. It's either to exit, to go to executive ownership, which basically means owning the business without working in it, or empire. That is where you are scaling something and selling it to an institutional player for $1 zillion type of thing. exit. So, and by the way, the triple option component of this is I want to get into brands where any of those are a possibility because, stuff doesn't always work out as you planned, and you want to be able, even if your goal is to build an empire, you want this to be something that you're able to exit and get out of. So there are plenty of people that, build wealth for themselves and their families, buying a franchise, running it, growing it, building it for a period of time, and then selling it, exiting, without ever getting into multiple units after, 5 to 10 years or whatever. That can be a great path for some people. When you look at executive ownership, which again, just owning the business without working in it every day, there are a lot of people that are able to grow, who are looking to cut their teeth in entrepreneurship, as I did with this model. You get in, you work at it for a year or two, build some scale, learn the business, hire a manager, and then take your hands off. And now you've built a cash flowing asset that whether you take that and you get into an independent business, or you take that and acquire more locations in the same brand or more locations in other brands, that can be a great outcome too. Or empire, which is that's the path that, hey, we're going to go buck wild and open as many units as we can and buy up as many units as we can. That can be a great path as well. Really quickly on growth and franchising, the two ways that you can grow horizontally and vertically. Horizontally is I'm in this brand and I want to do a roll up, or I want to open up a ton of different units within this same brand, all over the country. That's a path that some people decide to go down. The other option, when you look at vertical growth, this is what you see commonly in both restaurants and in stuff like home services, which is when you say, I'm going to operate in this market and I'm going to stack multiple synergenic brands on top of each other, take advantage of the overlap in personnel and structure and, facilities, all of that. So tons of paths to growth, but all of those that's kind of how I think about the different paths. Hope that's helpful.
Great question here. I think good segue into this one. What financing options are out there for someone that is currently operating a franchise business and looking to expand?
That's a great option, a great question as well. A lot of the same financing options are available to you, as far as like the SB, obviously until you get to the cap and everything, a lot of that's still going to be available to you. However, a lot of that's not even going to be franchise specific necessarily if you're looking to grow through acquisition. Obviously, anybody who's acquired businesses and acquired subsequent businesses, they may share that, sometimes SBA loans have some teeth in them that can make that kind of challenging. And so sometimes, after you have some scale, it can make sense to look at non-SBA loans if you can get them. But yeah, it's going to vary based on whether you're trying to open new locations versus acquiring existing ones. And it's going to vary based on the brand and a number of other, variables there.
So there are SBA examples, right, for expansion. Then there's just classic Main Street lending. Then there's balance sheet growth, right? Those are kind of the paths. I guess you could raise equity as well, right? Bring on partners to bring in capital to help grow. Are those kind of the four big ones?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I throw in there is just like depending on the brand, like for example, in Smash My Trash, where so much of our investment is in trucks. I mean, these trucks are almost 300 grand. So, it makes sense in our situation to, go the asset based lending route as opposed to an SBA loan sometimes when we're looking at growth. So, you'll see something very similar. And I saw there was a question about B&M. Somebody was asking what that stood for in that matrix. It's brick and mortar. So just businesses that have a brick and mortar presence. Sometimes there are specific, lenders that like to work with brick and mortar businesses that will finance the build out. So a lot of different options depending on what the brand is.
Super cool. All right. So one more question, and I think we're running up on, we're going to try to finish around 12:55. And I know you're trying to go see Bill Belichick get announced today.
That's right. Yeah. So
yeah. What can you explain? Let me ask a question. Can you explain that?
How I don't know where I should start. Should I explain?
How much time do we have? That's another webinar.
Look, let me put it like this, Michael. Warren Buffett just came to you and offered to become the CIO of Girdley Enterprises, and that's basically kind of like what we're feeling right now as Tar Heels. So it's a pretty big deal.
So is the whole scheme just to get his son a head coaching job?
Maybe it is, but if he wins, I don't care if he if he passes the job to his son, his girlfriend, whoever else. As long as we're winning, I'm a happy fan. Yeah,
you get nepotism his right way. Okay,
yes,
let's get through this because we got one more question, and then we gotta do the obligatory salesy slide. So, franchise consultant, I think we talked a lot about what you do. You help people find franchise systems and guide them through that. And then like you get paid by, how do you get paid when a franchise consultant helps somebody?
So a franchise consultant or broker, you'll hear those words or those terms used interchangeably. It's the same thing. They're paid by the franchisor. So it's a success fee on the back end of you signing a franchise agreement. The franchise broker is paid by the franchisor, very similar to a realtor. Obviously, I think self-serving answer here. I think that a good franchise consultant has a lot of value because they're going to help you get to that shorter short list more quickly, just because of the background that they have the ability, to pull from. Not everybody has to use me. I'd love for you to reach out to me and see if we can help you. But if not me or anybody, I would just say, pick somebody that's reputable, somebody who has put their money where their mouth is and owns or owned franchises in the past. I think that's important. And somebody who's going to approach working with you with the heart of a teacher and not the heart of a salesperson. Because when you're looking at franchises, you're going to get sold very hard. There are a lot of people that are going to be selling you on the opportunity, and you don't need a consultant that's going to sell you. You need a consultant that's going to teach and advise based on their own experiences. So, off my soapbox, but that's how I would approach it.
I get a lot of cold inbound from people trying to sell me hard on random franchises. I worry. I know you're not in this bucket, but I think a lot of the untrustworthy ones are those 10-foot selling those 10-foot pole franchises that we talked about that you want to stay away from. So
Yeah,
I think
and
that's a key thing. Go
yeah,
ahead.
the other thing I was just mentioned, a lot of the people that are messaging you on LinkedIn or that are, hanging out on Biz Buy Sell, basically all they're doing is they're trying to get your name and number to send it to the franchisor and then never talk to you again and hope that if they do that a couple hundred times, somebody's going to buy a franchise and they'll get a commission off of that. So, they're not really adding any consultative value to you in the process. And that's where I think that if you're actually looking to do this intentionally, which presumably anybody that is, find somebody that you trust and that is going to walk alongside you and do what, in my opinion, a consultant is supposed to do.
Cool. All right, let's do the salesy slide, and then we have two more questions, and that'll finish us up like right on time. So, people can go to your website. Thanks for doing this again, by the way. It's
Yeah,
super
definitely.
cool to
It's
go
great.
through it. What if they want to reach out to you, contact information is on the website.
Yep. Yeah. You can go on the website, have a newsletter you can subscribe to. If you're not, I'll put it like this: if you're not ready, now, but you might be ready in the future, follow along the newsletter. I do, just do kind of a monthly Q&A gateway session for people that are interested in franchising but aren't quite ready to move forward yet. So you can go register for that. Feel free to email me or Braden, who's on the call. His contact info is on there as well. We're happy to help, just answer general questions that you have. And if you are ready, to take a look at franchises, or if you already are and you want my help in doing so, the link to book a call is on there as well, and I'd be more than happy to talk with you.
Cool. And if you're interested in somebody who wants to pursue parallel business ownership, multi-business ownership, that's what Holdco conference is about. We're doing it in late March this year. So check it out. It is value priced, which means it's going to be incredibly awesome, but it's not cheap. So we hope to see you there. We've got some great speakers, and you'll get to ski too if you want. So check it out at holdcoconference.com. And let's do these last two questions. So Sean asked, how do you find an existing franchise worth buying that doesn't go to another franchisee first?
Great question. That is also something that is very, very hard to do because a lot of the quality resales are going to be, gobbled up by those internally. That is just a structural reality of, franchise acquisitions, that there really is no hack to getting around other than to get in the system first and then acquire, like I said, when the wind is at your back instead of at your front. With that being said, I was in a situation where I picked the brand that I wanted to be a part of, and I was like, I'm going to find the best deal that I can find and move there. And that's what I did. So you have to give up you have to, yield flexibility on either the brand or geography. And I would not recommend anybody yield that flexibility on the brand. You don't get a pass on it being a franchise because it's an acquisition. So I could go connect you with franchise opportunities, resale opportunities right now that are trading at a turn and a half of SDE, but that are still terrible deals because they're terrible franchises. So, please, that's the trap that searchers fall into all the time, and it pains me to see it. But they're so focused on the deal economics that it clouds their judgment towards the fact that it's just not a good business model, and you're still stuck there. So, not the most helpful answer, but I'd rather be unhelpful than not rooted in reality.
There's other lectures where people lie to people, so I appreciate your attitude. That's great.
Right.
All right, last question, and then I think we need to wrap up so you can go see Mr. Belichick get crowned. Let's see. Can brokers, consultants segue intros to potential partners, investors, in addition to lenders?
So technically, to make intros to investors, you are supposed to be registered with the SEC as a broker dealer, which I am not. And Michael, I think I told you earlier in the week that I don't, as standard practice, I avoid breaking the law when it's on YouTube. So I'll leave that answer there, but also, would just say that, in general, if I, know two people that, could potentially have a conversation that would be mutually beneficial, I'm inclined to connect them. And so, the answer in a formal capacity is no, but as with networking in general, I think most consultants that have a broad network will make an effort to make connections to you that will be helpful.
Right on. Super cool.
So,
All right, well, let's wrap it up there. We're coming up on 5 before the hour, and so we'll post this on YouTube. It'll go out to everybody that signed up, and then we got a couple of good comments from people that really enjoyed the session. So yay us. 10 out of 10. I think we did great, Connor.
Awesome. That is great to hear. And yeah, thank you, Michael. Really, really enjoyed it.